ROI of AI, monetizing AI, the discipline behind the dollars, people and change. And for this, we have Lori Viera, founder and CEO of LXL Women's Circle, and former client data analytics and AI officer at BMO. So is Lori here? All right, Lori. I was getting a little bit scared. I was like, okay, but maybe Lori's not here yet. So welcome, Lori, and I'll leave you with everybody.
It'd be frightening if you had to stand up here and ad-lib a little more, right? I'm here. I appreciate the opportunity to chat with you all, and I just wanted to start by saying, what if machines really aren't the issue? You know, what if AI, as it is today, raw, imperfect, rife with bias, I think we all know, adds more value than the risk that it creates? Even in businesses that are regulated, even in the banks, and I spent a long time there, and I can say that as an ex-CDAO of a bank, even in those cases, what if the time we spend guardrailing, ring fencing, containing risks is actually slowing innovation for AI and the transformation that we actually need to stay competitive? In our push to perfect AI and bias and fairness and navigate all of that, we often forget that we're already making mistakes at scale. Humans are making mistakes every day at scale. We're not measuring it in the same way, but we're still making them. It's baked into our language. It's baked into our processes. And all those off-script navigations that employees choose to do on their own and choose their own adventure. But we tolerate it because it's a person right behind that glass. There's an individual whom is accountable to that. But do we really measure the vastness or the errors at scale in the way in which we actually put AI to the test to measure it? And in our comfort metrics, things like average handle time in contact centers, NPS, revenue generation, are these metrics giving us a misleading sense because they're really straight lines relative to what we would do with AI? And so AI is a bit of a prism, I like to think of it as, because it's the thing we can't quite see through, but we really cannot look away from it. And it pushes everything to the surface. All of the processes, the tribal knowledge, all of the ontology within an organization that has been curated over years suddenly floats to the surface. Because AI doesn't really create bias, it reveals it. And in our chase for efficiency and revenue and all the stuff we're all trying to use it for, we often miss, I think, the bigger question. And that is, what if the machines aren't really slowing us down? What if the humans are? What if we can't get out of our own way? And so take my friend Leonard here. Now, as hip as he is, and I use that term very generously, he's living with AI every day on fire. This is at the center of what it is that he does. Now, he talks to his voice assistants. He plans his vacations at his ashram using voice-assisted technology. He considers ChatGPT among his best friends. Now, all the while, he's eating Cheetos in his basement, not realizing that COVID is over. Now, Leonard, I invite him out into the light. But why do we behave so differently, right? This comfortableness that we have with AI in our personal lives is a direct contrast to the comfort we have in corporations. There's risk in both, I would contend. But at home, AI is on fire. And at work, what are we, like half terrified, myself included? So in corporate Canada today, I would say we're sort of shackled by this weight, right, of our own voices. And this endless loop of questions, the things like, where do we begin? Like, what sailboats do we put in the water? Where do we test? How are we going to measure this thing? How are we going to actually build it? Where are we going to put it? Who are we going to hire in order to do it? The swirl of questions for people like poor Bob here on the screen, who's balancing his laptop in his hand trying to find a seat because he's been pushed back to work too early and there's not enough seats. And he's freaking stressed, right? And this is the state we're operating in. It's not a lack of AI capability, but it's this sort of surplus of human friction around it. And so the road to AI monetization, well, it's long and winding, and it's rarely linear. In fact, it's circuitous. And it's a series of loops and constant recalibration. And so this is the kind of AI journey that I've been on over the last number of years. And I've been in this space for 35 years, running data and analytics for banks and organizations, software companies in different places in Canada, US, and all over the world. And I see this really strange route to heaven. And so this is the AI journey that nobody puts in a playbook, right? This doesn't end up in corporate decks. But it begins with often this executive spark. An individual goes to Davos. Maybe the CEO is headed off to Davos. She is in some meeting and talks to someone. She reads a white paper. There's this high level of engagement and excitement, and often even pressure because their colleagues and friends are talking about all of the AI initiatives that they're doing within their own corporations. So she steps up to the plate, like we always do, and she says, you know what, we need to bring in some consultants. And so in comes the parade of consultants, the E&Ys, the Bains, the McKinsey, like they're all coming, they're coming for us, right? They're coming with their reports and their white papers and their perspectives and best practices. And we're promising this idea that POCs can get off the ground within a week. You know, give us your data, we'll show you some outputs. We've built these agentic workflows. You know, you're going to do away with X% of your workforce. We are the solution in order to help you trim and manage your ROE, return on equity challenges, all of your cost challenges. You know, and then, but in comes the workshops, because of course we like it, we're incented, but what do we do? So then there's a sea of Post-it notes, all with an idea, we could do this, we could transform that, we could do that, we could do that. And then lo and behold, Claire, who's been at the company for 30 years in the background, puts up her hand and says, how are we gonna fund all this? And then they're like, oh, hang on, grab all the Post-it notes, dwindle them down, and there's a couple sailboats, like a capstone projects that the organization chooses. Now, those get the privilege of the funding. So that small, scarce amount of funding gets moving, and it's largely cost-related. It's some initiative that's going to have the largest amount of cost in some kind of contained space that doesn't kill us and end us landed up in the news. And so at this point, you'd think, great, you know what, our work is done. But it's not even close. Because then emerging somewhere from the fields, there's this small kind of shred of hope, right? A brave few step forward. And these are like these early adopters, right? They're willing to play. They got their bats, they got their equipment, they're kind of roaming onto the field. They're like, I can try this, yeah, sure. Like I can try and automate my contact center flows. I can try and, you know, automate some policies. Sure, I could build me an agent, no problem. I'd like to try this. You know, I got some big cost pressures. But it turns out that this might not be a field of dreams. Because the typical process of adoption of technology has tended to look like this, right? This is a typical one for any tech rollout. So with those early enthusiasts jumping on board on that bandwagon, they might be part of these contact center pilots or an agile group, and they put their heads down and get together to figure out a way to monetize. But they're already on the hook for cost savings. So they're stepping up to the plate and they're looking at this sort of agentic type of future or AI-based future. And about 15% of them typically adopt the new tech. They hit their chasms, they roll through to some other level. And then if they get it right, the floodgates open and change adopts, right? And the masses pursue. But it's not exactly that way when we're thinking about building agents in large organizations and even small. It's a lot bumpier. That adoption curve is new. The technology's new, the people are new and looking at it. So it's a bit more messy, right, with chasms throughout. Because AI adoption is a heart and a head business. The intellectual pieces, I would contend, are the easier pieces than getting the heart and the soul of organizations wrapped around it in order to monetize it. And unlike anything that has preceded it, AI exposes what I would say is the complexities that sit underneath the organization in a way that we've never been used to. And so those policies, the processes, all the exceptions and the variations among teams, it all starts to come to the surface in an automated way and at scale and exposed because we're playing in a playground that's untested. So I'll take one example of a call center agent to help connect customers to details about their policies and procedures. Customers call into contact centers, typically within banks. Perhaps this is something you're aware of. And in behind, you've got agents who are drawing on thousands of policies. Now, these policies were formerly held in green screens and PDFs and all kinds of different wiki lookup type tools, but they're the conduit between getting the customer an answer and drawing on policies. So this is everything from how long do I have to dispute a credit card transaction to I'm a joint tenants in common and I have a mortgage with a partner, but we're separating. How do I deal with that? All of those little nuanced situations that are nested somewhere within a policy that are very common for banks. And so the first chasm that they reach isn't actually technical. It was this thing around the human itself and the recognition of what it is that this system does. So I was in an organization formerly. We built this agent who had the ability to drink in and be that bridge between all these policies and talking to a customer. And so I sat one day at a branch, and I was getting my own banking done and engaging with them on a particular transaction I couldn't do online. And I was talking to them about this agent. I said, how's it going? Like, how's the adoption? They said, it's great. Yeah, it's good. It's good. I use it for the simple stuff. And I'm like, well, what do you mean? They're like, well, with the simple things, I feel that it can answer. And I said, well, hit me with the complex thing. They said, well, for the complex stuff, I go to the branch manager. These are the really big things that, this thing can't answer. I mean, this agent, it doesn't know how to answer. So let's try it. So I sat shoulder to shoulder with this agent and said, all right, well, let's put that let's bring the branch manager over, it's like Jeopardy, do a little bit of a bake-off here. So we're going to ask the same question of the branch manager and ask the same question of the agent itself. Lo and behold, what you found is not only was the answer correct, I would contend in both cases, but the data that was underneath it, the access to the policy, the reference material, all the connection points, the justification, the scripting, the proper guardrailing was so much more thorough in the agent. Then we start to get a group of people in the branch interested. They're all kind of swarming. Ask it this question, ask it this question. So they're playing with it. But the punchline is this, is that for many of us engaging with agents, the technologists build it with the best scope in mind. But the individuals use it with minimal scope because they don't understand. They also don't understand how to prompt it. And we're talking to our agents as though we talk to Google. When in your personal life, you're not talking to it at all that way. Last week I was showing it a picture of my furnace filter, trying to figure out how I couldn't get this damn thing to work and conversing with it as though it was my universal Maytag man and individual who could fix anything in my house. Those are different conversations. They're threads. They're continuous. They're additive in terms of the dialogue. In corporations, we talk to people, and we have this pathway to get to an answer, yet we expect technology to be rather binary. We expect it to yield an answer for us that is something similar to yes or a no, or an X or a Y, and then document some stuff. We don't appreciate the conversation that's happening to get to good. And our metrics are measured on the initial question. They're measured on what that yield looked like as they were here. So we kept hitting a chasm, right, in this particular blue bank. And what was tricky about it is that we would throw the baby out with the bathwater. We're like, yep, we thought we could do away with the whole queue. We thought we'd automate all these processes, and it turns out it's only good for 10%. AI doesn't work. These were the punchlines that were then socialized. It wasn't that the AI didn't work. It's that we hadn't appreciated the adoption curve and what it took for it to work. And we held it to a watermark that was dramatically different than a human. And so that is not AI failing. It's humans not understanding how to leverage AI and not shepherd through the change in a way that would allow it to succeed. They're very different things. And to me, that's good news, because if the technology couldn't do the job, that'd be one thing. We'd be having a different conversation here. If it's not that, and it's us, the question becomes, how do we get out of our own way? And so there is a real art and science around prompting, and I think perhaps all of us in this room know this, even engaging with our own LLMs, whichever you choose, whichever adventure you choose. It is definitely art and science. But there is a way to get the right answers. Even if your guardrails are great, even if you do question prompts in the background for the organizations to guide people to say, hey, ask these kind of questions, or did you mean this, or did you mean that? All of that structure that underpins the rollout of an agent is important, but it still doesn't matter if the human themselves either doesn't appreciate what the power of it is and can play with it. Perhaps that's solved through some element of co-creation, or they don't understand the follow-ups and the questions and the answers, and that they're not on board to help the thing succeed. And so I ask ourselves, and I struggled with this a lot because as a responsibility for rolling out many, many agents over my life, what are the metrics that we set that are going to be the yardstick for whether or not these agents actually succeeded? What are they? Are they the same? Like, are they just that they need to deliver an amount of cost savings in the end and ultimately hit our bottom line so our operating leverage can be better? Is it that within a banking system? Is it a revenue or NPS? Or at the tactical level, when you start to look at the agents, is there some kind of leading indicator around behavior adoption beyond usage, but a trust metric, the ability to be able to understand a depth of trust at the frontline level that starts you inching towards that chasm and a level of adoption that signifies that you've actually crested, that you're actually at that point where individuals are going to buy in. And so when I think about AI and I think about leading large organizational initiatives, and I've been part of cloud and optimization and all kinds of varying levels. I know I'm talking a lot about agents, but varying levels of AI adoption within large organizations. And it always comes down to change management. And I think people think that this is just a presentation. It's me standing up here explaining, hey, everybody, we're going to be going down an AI-first mindset, and here's what that looks like, and here are the initiatives we're doing, here's what I need you all to do, and it's sort of once and done. But this is a world where they just cannot appreciate. Their ideas of what AI is and the risks affiliated with it are shaped on Instagram. And they're living in a world that is very agentic, Gen AI oriented, and it's automated at scale. And so the fears are attached to this generative AI space, when meanwhile the realities of what we live in corporations are somewhere over here in a rather basic place. But either way, the planfulness, the change management strategy essential to get AI from being a great idea to being able to monetize it, whether you're in a large organization or small, is everything. Adoption is everything, because you want everybody out there not only using agents in the ways in which they're maximized, but thinking in a manner that is AI first. And those are different things. And that's not solved for by one presentation, however influential you are, however much you're paid by the word. And so I look at this and I think, you know what, there are three sort of broad models in my mind. On the furthest, and there are, I talk a lot about this with organizations around talent to task matchup. And this question of where do you put technology versus where do you put a human? And where do you put both? Where is a human, of course, in the loop? And so I think these models are ones we are familiar with. On one extreme, there's technology doing it alone. On the other extreme, it's a human doing it alone. And then there's a human in the loop in the middle. And suffice it to say, I think most of us are probably playing in a space, and by show of hands, how many are in the mucky middle on the, it's a human in the loop? Like everything we're doing is human in the loop. Yeah, I mean, it's banks, right? And banks, insurers, folks in financial services. It makes sense. But the human in those cases is a trust layer. It's an insurance policy against all the crap that could go wrong. I almost swore, reveal my real personality up here. But it's that, right? It's an insurance policy against that which could go wrong. Makes sense, right? But then you start to look and you tear apart jobs and you tear apart aspects of jobs and tasks at the individual level and go ask yourself, what can be AI-ified and what could be automated? My bias is anything that can be, should be. Anything that can be, should be. You're hiring a new job, you're hiring a new individual, you look at the job description and you say, of all of these things here, what can be done by an agent? What can be automated? And the residual work that is left is that of a human. Now, I realize and have lived this in my own life in running data analytics and AI in banks, is that it's very tricky to do. It's hard for people to get their heads around that. And so, but there is delineation, right? There's criteria that define things that tech is great at, where data is available, it's scalable, it's expected processes. When things go south, people don't lose their minds. It doesn't have that political inflammation that comes with it. So you can play in lower stakes situations and assign technology to the task and have it run, with not a lot of oversight in those types of situations. On the other end, there is still work that a human's going to do. It's creative. It's stuff where there are patterns that don't exist. So obviously the data can't be trained on a pattern you don't exist. It's the binding together of multiple processes in banking organizations where it's like, I'm going to create a product and then I'm going to help craft what it's going to look like, and then I'm going to bring it to market, and then over here I'm going to do the branding, and there's this succession of things that occurs. But even in that case, I've seen agentic solutions that are monetizing that thread, that full stack. So when I look at this, I look at where we actually need a human in the loop and what value is it of that human in the loop. Are they tuning models at that point? Are they seeing how the humans behave with the AI and overseeing it in an effort to be able to make the execution that much more effective? Are they there because there needs to be a fall guy or fall gal when things go south, and there needs to be a face in order to send them out to pasture to say, yes, we made an error, but it was Susie's fault? And I'd ask ourselves that question at the task level. Where are the places you actually need these? And where are the places that you actually want to apply one model versus another? Now, really, for me, the goal of AI monetization and what I see happening in organizations today, and I do work in different countries, is that they are largely focused on a cost play. It's AI for cost takeout. And so they're fishing in places like contact centers. For those of us who are, I don't know, for those of us in the room, who's playing in contact centers? Contact centers, savings, and who's playing in frontline, like people who are doing work at the frontline level, frontline employees, meaning like trying to save some dollars there. Yeah, it makes sense, right? So we're trying to figure out how to automate some of the tasks of the highest amount and largest expense on our P&L. So it makes sense that organizations are trying to agentify or AIify aspects of those workflows in order to get some money out of the system and monetize AI. And I think there is way more from what it is that we're seeing. The majority, in fact, of agent testing that's out there is cost savings related. Makes sense, right? So we're going to see if this thing can actually help us save some money before we're going to see if it can grow top-line revenue and before we're going to see if it can improve the employee or customer experience. So I see it kind of moving in that direction. Revenue is ultimately kind of last in the mix. We're freeing up capacity in order to make more money in some ways. And so this model for change management is a typical one that organizations employ irrespective of AI, and it's got a bit of a cycle, right, affiliated with it. And what you can see here, it's always been a change management cycle with these various aspects, but it starts with defining, in this case, what the agent's role actually is. And so what is that? We need to automate what the things that we don't want to do or can't do, or where the data is sufficient in order to be upheld itself. And then this analyze layer is where we look at where the environment that AI actually operates within. And there's all kinds of dynamic elements, of course, affiliated with that, right? But figuring that aspect out. The data track and all of this other kind of circular loop is this constant cycle of ongoing alignment and refinement. And I had experienced it in a number of cases where we were building agents and we'd set it out, it was hitting the KPIs, there was some bumpiness, but there was this continuous need to align and reset and figure out what the leading indicators meant when we were rolling out agents to front lines, what people were liking, what they weren't liking, and understanding. It was very, very iterative. So even the process of the build itself and the guardrailing and the questions and the prompts were constantly changing as the program was in flight. You got to expect that. Right? AI is new and the people using it are both new. And so I would contend that what you're measuring is actually an adaptation cycle. Like how quickly and rapidly can we adapt to the usage of this thing? How fast do people readily give us the feedback that they need? How many more guardrails are we creating along the way? What other prompts are being introduced? What's being used more than other prompts? Where is the workflow largely going? How are people using it? For what types of questions? Are they thumbs up and thumbs downing the content? All of these are just signals to the point of ecstasy, right? Where we're sitting out as organizations saying, cut 70 people, save $100. We're stating these, but the actual lessons and the metrics are along the way. And those, I would contend that the greater degree you manage those metrics and those signals, the greater the outcome is going to be, because you're in a rapid learning cycle. It's like you're flighting A/B testing, but you're doing it every minute as people are hitting the agents. And so I'd look at a different way of actually analyzing the results so you can get to monetization. And so just from my perspective, when you look at it and pulling up, what I really think, and I hope you heard from the talk, is AI is heart and head. And I went down a path too where I'm like, how am I going to build this thing? Like, what's it going to look like? Like, what's the technology and what cloud infrastructure am I going to have? How am I going to rag this and how am I going to tag it? And what are the different tags? Like, I went down that rat hole for a long time thinking that that was the problem I was solving for, only to realize that the tech build itself as a proportion of the AI workload was maybe 10%, maybe, generously. And this is after all the IT people argued about who was going to own it and how they were going to set it up, and all that was after that whole drama. But you figure out the tech stack is actually rather simple. But then there's all this judgment that comes into play. Like, how are we actually going to use this thing? When you say this from a sentiment perspective, what does it mean? When she says that word, what is the relationship of that word? What are the vectors? Like, it's a heart and head symphony that is not well orchestrated in organizations today. They commit to doing the agent, they send it off to pasture, a bunch of technical people build some stuff, they come back, they roll it out, it doesn't work, they say that the AI doesn't work. That's faulty logic. It's an iterative process. And so you really can't implement AI without this sort of persistent end-to-end change management. It's impossible. And so what it is that we've done in an organization that I was part of is simultaneous to hoisting up AI capstone projects. We'd chosen a few, they were cost related, as it makes sense within banks. And then simultaneously, we hoisted up a change management function. Now I ran a data analytics and AI group. There were 500 of us, Canada, US, we were scattered about. We were a technical crew, but we knew enough to know that the thing that we were building was a change management problem. We had a tech lift to do, and we were responsible for tuning the models and creating the environments and all the rest. But we created a change management function that was attached to and inside of the organization creating it. And we brought in change management experts. We paired those folks with the folks building the agent. And we said, what do we need to do to get this into the hearts and heads of our front lines? What is the path? What kinds of communications do we need? What feedback loops do we need to build in? How will we know when we're successful? How will we know when we've talked about this enough? You know, many of us will go up there, we'll talk once, we're like, great, thou shalt do it, boom, we're on. And we assume that everybody understood it. When meanwhile, they're just trying to figure out ChatGPT. Like they don't understand the gap between using and monetizing AI at scale in corporations does not equal an Instagram reel. Like they're still not getting the relationship between those two things. So all that said, if you're launching agents and you're launching AI at scale, find a home for change management to come alongside that and ride alongside it. And perfect is the enemy of good. I started off with this. I'm like, you know what? You're better off to test and get it wrong in situations that are low political risk in our kind of regulated industries. You're better off to do that than you are to go out there and make it perfect. You're testing along the way. It's like a digital execution and a mobile app. You're simulating and you're learning along the way. It's the only way to do it because you cannot forecast the things you don't know. You cannot forecast the learning that is yet to come. And it's the best way to do it. And define your human in the loop parameters early. You need fewer than you think, I would contend, but you need different ones than you think. And then the human work, and we learned this the hard way too, there is work that the agent, you set out to say, you know what, we're going to eliminate 70 rules because we're going to automate this. It turns out, even well-tuned, the AI can maybe do 60. But then you've tried to eliminate all of those other roles, right? What is left at the end, I'll call it peas and carrots, is you set out to be able to automate a full meal, right? It's the roast beef. I'm like that. It's like they want roast beef, you want everything. I'm going to take all of this workload and I'm going to automate it. I'm no longer serving that meal. What you find in the end, after AI has its way with it, it absorbs the roast beef, right? It takes the majority of good, heavy stuff with good data. But there's peas and carrots left. Who's going to run the peas and carrots? Who's going to eat those? Like, how are we going to deal with those? But it turns out it's people's half jobs, part-time job, remnants of their jobs to do what I'll call as residual work that is left over after the agent's had its way. Who does that? And what does that job look like? On one end, it's very complex. It doesn't have data. It can't be automated in some way. A human is really not trained to do that thing. It's only part of their job. So on one extreme, it could be very complex. On the other end, it could be not complex at all. It's just that you have no data on it. So what kind of job is that in the end, when you're left automating some stuff? And I would suggest that we need to think about those things and learn about those things and then recast the jobs of the humans. It's not that the jobs of the humans in the end are going to be only peas and carrots. There'll be some good stuff in there too. But you are thinking when you go in that you're going to make this whole thing agentic and wipe it all out, only to realize there's bits of that meal that are still left over. Humans need to do it. So business case for it up front when you're aiming to monetize AI and figure out what that meal actually would look like, would be the point. And then when you set your learning objectives, I think they are both, when your business objectives, they're learning objectives and business objectives. And I had a hard time, I'll tell you, convincing an organization that this is what we were doing. Because, of course, our leaders are getting chirped at all the time by consultants outside saying everybody's wiping this out and wiping that out and you're way behind. And so there was an impatience, right? It's like, can you just build this thing so that I can wipe out some cost and carry on and move on to the next thing and move on to the next thing? Can you just go do that, Lori? Absent the idea that we need to learn a few things. What we need to learn is what the actual adoption cycle looks like, how long it takes for a person to move from doing things the way they were used to doing them with an agent. That is a huge learning objective because it's the dominant lever that's going to affect the outcome that you want on cost. So what are the learning objectives? What is the length of time that it takes to build something? What's the length of time it takes to iterate? How do you get to that contagion effect with all adoption curves where the people come from the field of dreams, they're like, I like it, like it, like it, and then suddenly they all like it. What does that cycle look like? Those metrics, the goal of learning those things affects the ability to monetize AI. And yet we're not thinking about it because we're too busy trying to crank this thing out in 3 months and set up the environment and move on to the next thing. But matter greatly because the thing that we're ultimately trying to do is not create a bunch of agents and use AI to make money within organizations. We need an AI first mindset. Like you go to hire a new job, what of that job, or what of the job description can we automate and AIify right out of the gate? What can we do there? When you look at all the tasks across an organization, how do you set metrics for every single group to say, how do you automate your tasks? What is it that you need? Small AI, like these are not kind of higher order generative stuff, but how do you come at it with an AI first mindset? We're culturally in order to monetize AI in and outside of regulated industries, it's like glasses on one's face. When you look through those glasses, it should be colored with AI. Everything you see in a company colored with AI. It's like, how do I AIify it? That becomes in the same way we grew up thinking digital first and we were migrating people out of branches and our in-store networks and moved them out of the phones and we got them on platform digital. Great, you got them on the mobile app. Next phase, how do you AIify it, including everything in digital? It is a different thing, and I reference it as glasses on one face. You can't look anywhere else. It's right here. There's nowhere else to look. Everything we see is a sea of potential for AI. That mindset shift takes, as you can imagine, a ton of time. There is going to be a groundswell of people who say, you know what, it's not possible. And we're going to do it this way. That's not possible for the machines to do it. So you're working on a mindset shift. The final thing I'll say about data is that I would use AI and the building of agents as the opportunity to get funding for all of the data stuff that we need for enrichment. It's the stuff that's been on ice for decades that no one has money for. They never wanted to do it. Now they see the potential of that. But in addition, you make errors at scale when your data is not great. It not only holds you back, but your risk is exemplified. It's catapulted in an environment of AI. Use it. Right? Use that to get the budget for the things that us technical folks needed. And I would finally just say that kudos to folks in the room because you're making change. You're making change for an organization and you're here because obviously you're interested in it, but you're pushing uphill a lot of times. I think you're surrounded by warm and friendlies. Use your heart, use your head, and let's make some money on AI. Thank you.